So good afternoon. I'm Patrick Mann. I'm the director of the School for Advanced Studies in the Arts and Humanities, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this, which is our first in our winter series for the SASAH Speaker Series. And we have this long-winded title, which is Creativity, Innovation, Justice, and then the subtitle this term is Mentors and Storytellers. And we know that we're being joined by some amazing artists and storytellers. So I'm thrilled to be able to welcome Jeff Thomas, the photographer and Governor General's Award winner and curator, and Bear Witness, who is a DJ musician who many of you will know from A Tribe Called Red. So welcome, Jeff and Bear. I'm going to turn it over to our Dean of Arts and Humanities, Michael Milday, who's going to say a few words of welcome and do a land acknowledgement.
Thanks very much, Patrick, and great pleasure to welcome all of you through the magic of Zoom. Unfortunately, we can't see the participants, so we're talking to our cameras in that way that we're all trying to get used to. It is a great pleasure to welcome you all to this SASAH Speaker Series for the winter part of it, exploring themes that are really central to our mission as a faculty of arts and humanities. It's also, I think, really fitting that this talk is taking place during Indigenous Awareness Week at Western, and it serves as a reminder of all the work that we have to do as a university and as members of the universities with respect to the work of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples here in London and wherever you are in the participants out there. We have a moment in history that we're living with, but we have to understand that that moment brings with it all the history that went before. And part of our challenge is that we don't always know our history particularly well. And I think an important part of working towards that understanding is to make a step towards acknowledging where we are on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Lenape, the Attawandaron, and the Haudenosaunee peoples. And that's a necessary step, but it's really just a first step. And we need to deepen our understanding. And I look forward to hearing from our speakers today on themes that are related to this kind of understanding. So welcome to Jeff and to Bear. A great pleasure to have you join us in this virtual space. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Cheers.
Thanks very much, Michael. So I'm going to say a few more words and then we get to hear from Jeff and from Bear. So for our program today, we're going to first have a brief talk from Jeff, who will be showing some of his work. And then Bear Witness will be showing a little bit of video of Tribe Called Red and also giving a talk about his work. And after that, I'm going to ask a couple of questions, so essentially so that we can hear Jeff and Bear speak with each other. And then after that, three of our students, two from SASAH, Spencer Bubis and Sarah Charette, have some questions they wanted to ask. And also Michelle Wilson, who is PhD student from Arts and Humanities, who has worked with SASAH students, also has a question. So we'll hear from them. And then if you yourselves out there in Zoom land have questions, please send them in on the chat or the Q&A, and we can certainly share them. So before I turn things over to Jeff, I just wanted to formally, or at least with a few more words, introduce Jeff and Bear. It is really a pleasure for me to introduce Jeff Thomas. I consider him a collaborator and a colleague, as well as a friend, and I even want to say a guide. Jeff and I are working together on a project called Guardianship and State, involving many artists and scholars, and it's a true pleasure. Jeff, as said, is a photographer and also a Governor General's Award winner. He is an urban-based Iroquois who is self-taught, and he's a storyteller, a writer, a curator, a public speaker, and of course, an artist. And he lives in Ottawa, Ontario. His work is in collections in Canada, the United States, and Europe. And he's had numerous awards in addition to the Governor General's Award. And those include the Canada Council Duke and Duchess of York Award in Photography. He's a member of the Royal Canadian Academy of Art. He received the Karsh Photography Award in 2008. And also he received the REVAL Indigenous Art Award in 2017, as well as mentioned the Canada Council Governor General's Award in Visual Arts. So thanks for coming today, Jeff, and really looking forward to hearing from you. And I'm going to introduce Bear now. And I hadn't met Bear except through Jeff very recently, and it's been a real pleasure to connect. So Bear Witness is a member of a tribe called Red, along with DJ Toolman, and they're an internationally acclaimed electronic group who I'm sure most of you have heard and admire. They emerged from the Ottawa club party called Electric Pow Wow, which began in 2007. And they described themselves as powwow step music as a soundtrack to the contemporary evolution of powwow. They've been nominated for the Polaris Prize in 2013 and 2017, and also won 3 Juno Awards. And that include the Breakthrough Group in 2014 and Group of the Year in 2018. So some huge honors, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from Bear as well. So that said, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff. And Jeff, you can let me know when you want me to share my screen to turn on the slides.
Okay. I guess I'll start off by thanking Patrick for the opportunity to speak with my son today. It's quite an unusual experience to be able to do that. I remember the first time that I ever gave a public talk. I couldn't find a babysitter to take care of Bear, so I brought him to the gallery with me and had him all set up in the back of the gallery in its blanket and his books and toys and everything. And as soon as I started talking, everybody in the audience started looking around and laughing because he was pulling his blanket up to the podium and put it right down next to me and just started playing there. So it's been quite an adventure for me working in the visual arts. I began I date it to 1980 when I had my first solo exhibition in Buffalo, New York, through the Artist Run Center SEPA Gallery. It was on a city bus, and my photographs were placed where the advertisements usually are put. And it traveled around the city for about 6 weeks. I think it was a real kind of sign of the future for me and my work in terms of traveling and trying to understand, I guess, what it means to be Indigenous in an urban setting. I found in the beginning that there was no definition for urban Indian. There was city Indian, but that was kind of a derogatory designation for somebody, but I wanted to prove to my elders that that being bound to a city doesn't mean that you're less than anybody else. That's been my priority for my work. I should say that the last 2 years have been quite challenging for me in terms of a great quest that's come to an end that began in 1979 after a car accident left me unable to work again. I had to develop or find a new career, and that's when I started going to my interest in photography. When I started, it was interesting that I found that there was no recognizable First Nations Indigenous photographers represented in the archive, and there were no photographs taken by anybody that showed Indigenous people living in urban centers. So that was that was kind of the way that I was going to go in the beginning, to do an alternative to that. And then the work of American photographer Edward S. Curtis began to surface in the early 70s and flooded the market with his romanticized views of tribal culture in the North American West. It was all over. It was on posters and T-shirts and coffee mugs, and and even saw it on TV shows as decoration. So it drove me to not discount his work, but to challenge that work. And so from the beginning, I saw my practice as activist in terms of wanting to challenge the norms that people have grown up with in terms of Indigenous people, and to really build something different as opposed to looking at Indians. I was really curious about what those people that posed for those photographers in the 19th century thought. I would have loved to sit down with them and to ask them their experiences. And we only had one chance. Ali Kazmi, a documentary filmmaker, made a film about my work called Shooting Indians, A Journey with Jeff Thomas. And we went out to the West Coast at Comox retirement home, where the last surviving person that had been in Edward Curtis's film, originally titled In the Land of the Headhunters, was still alive. She was around 100 years old, and we had a chance to talk to her, and she didn't speak English. And so we had a translator, and in the end, she said that, to the amazement of everybody in the room, that she had posed topless for Edward Curtis. So it's got a revelation that was quite interesting, but she said that she liked Edward Curtis. He was a nice man in that. So, but that was kind of like the point of contention in my work, was to move from that to another place. And Patrick, the first slide, I'll show how that all began. I really began as a street photographer working in the downtown area of Buffalo, New York, that was at the time going through a revitalization program. So they were tearing down a lot of the old buildings in that. But in 1983, we moved to Toronto, and I tried to carry on the same sort of street work in Toronto that I had been doing in Buffalo, but Toronto was a very different city. So I was going through a bit of rethinking my practice. And one day I took Bear, you see in the photograph here at Culture Revolution, is that we went down to Queen Street West to go to a comic book store. And you can see just in his hand, in his left hand, that he has a little bag that has comic books in it. So when we were walking back across Queen Street to go to the parking lot, I noticed this wall with Culture Revolution on it, and I was going to photograph it. But it didn't look interesting enough to really take the time to make a photograph. And then I thought, well, I'll pose Bear next to it, just kind of, he'd have a memory of that day. And so that was really what it was about. And then, but when I printed the image and I began to see that something else was at work here, another kind of layer to my career was beginning to emerge. And I realized that I didn't have the luxury of being a photographer that could just roam the streets and photograph things in that tradition, street life in that. As an Indigenous person, I had to rethink what I was doing. And given that Toronto had the top, or one of the top Indigenous populations in Canada, and how that you virtually never saw Indigenous people in that population. So when we were standing there and I made this photograph, in my mind I was thinking, how long would we have to stand here before we'd see another Indigenous person walk by? But what began to emerge from the photograph was the fact that I had to intervene into the kind of narrative about who Indians are, what is a real Indian, where do they live? And so that was the point when things began to change in my career. So as you'll notice in this photograph with Bear, on his baseball cap, he has a reproduction of an Edward Curtis photograph. And this man's name is Two Moons. He was a Cheyenne leader. He was a veteran of the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And he was a very prominent man in his community. And then there's kind of the play on elements here, even with the brick wall, in the sense of coming to an urban center, and that your culture doesn't come with you. It kind of stops at the door. And basically because we don't have that type of community in cities as we do on reserves. So what does that mean in terms of what do you begin to identify? What do you begin to intervene with? And the following year, or 1986, I moved to Winnipeg, and I vowed that until I found the inspiration, I would not use my camera again. So there's a 3-year void in my CV and in my archive of no material being shot. Next slide. But what I did find in Toronto, or in Winnipeg, was the sense of, because it has such a large Indigenous and very visible population, Indigenous population, I used the kind of the topography of Winnipeg with the forks, the confluence of the Red and the Assiniboine rivers, as a way of thinking about how I would proceed with my work and looking at the overlap between the photographs that I was making of powwow dancers and the photographs that I was making on the streets of Winnipeg. So it started this idea, this percolating sense of this might lead to something important. So I worked with that idea. I should also say that within the last 2 years, I began to change my identity as how I was identified as an artist. As Patrick noted, I initially identified as urban Iroquois because people were saying that I was born at Six Nations and that, and I wanted to be clear about the fact that I was born in Buffalo, New York. And so there was kind of a romanticization that was going on there, as strange as it was. But I realized that that cycle was coming to an end about 2 years ago, and I started identifying as a photo-based storyteller. And along with that, I also began to identify with my disability as a part of my practice as well, and how that's influenced what I photograph and what I choose to do with my work. And also being an interventionist, going back to my elder, Emily General, who was a prominent activist during the 30s and 40s at Six Nations. And she instilled with me this idea, or this precept, that if you're gonna, as an Indigenous person, you cannot stay away from politics. And so I thought, well, how can I bring that where's my battlefield? And I decided that photography was going to be that battlefield. So this is a photograph that I made of Bear when he was staying with me in Ottawa, I think in 1997. It was Canada Day, and we were being interviewed at that time, and I wanted to be interviewed by this building with the large Canadian flag that goes up every year. So we're probably about maybe 3 or 4 blocks away from Parliament Hill. And, but this was this idea of the contrast, so the juxtaposition between a Canadian symbol and bear, and what is in between? What is it that we talk about in terms of our identity? How do we relate to Canada, to nationalism, to citizenship, and all of these important components? Next slide. And this is a work that that I completed about 2 years ago, and I just recently updated. And this image I wanted to show because it is a part of the activism that is coming into my work, in terms of using these extended panels to bring what might look like incongruous photographs together within this space. The series is called Where the Rivers Meet, and it's named after the influence of the Red and the Assiniboine rivers in Winnipeg. And I'm curious about what flows down in each river, and what happens when they come together at the confluence, and these components begin to mix up and mix together, including the histories with Indigenous meeting place, and then with the fur traders and all that. But with this panel here, it's based on Joseph Brant. And the photograph on the left-hand side shows the Caledonia site, the first one that took place, I think it was in 2007, I think it was. I went down and photographed the occupation site after everything had quieted down. And then the photograph next to it is in Albany, New York. And it is the foundation for what many people know as the Truro Wampum Belt, the first treaty that was arranged between my ancestors and the Dutch And in Albany, I found this monument that had the two of them together. And I wanted to incorporate this as well, because as a monument, it says something, but I wanted to bring back that focus of the Truro Wampum Belt from 1613, when it was originated between the Dutch and Haudenosaunee. The photograph on the right-hand side is my miniature figurine called Red Robe. I take him with me when I travel, and I photograph him in sites that provide me with a catalyst for telling a story. And in this instance, it was talking about the Grand River. And of course, this relates back to both of the photographs that preceded it. But this is at the end of the Grand River at Lake Erie. And Bear, my son was with me, Bear was with me, and so we did a drive along the Grand River trying to find the head of the Grand River, which had not been surveyed. And Joseph Brand, of course, was the person that brought everybody from New York State up to the Grand River, in the settlement there that emerged. And controversial from the start, it's always been, is a land-based for the Iroquois people. It's always been contentious in terms of actually how much land did it incorporate. And so it's always been a debated issue. But for me, when I used to go visit my elders, they always had the book, I think I have the slide here, the book cover with the, that I saw as a kid, and it had Red Jacket, or Joseph Brand on the cover, and the book was really about the documents and the history of the Haldeman tract and all the complications that had arisen since we moved over, since my ancestors moved to the Grand River. So this panel really looks at that with the two lines going through as a Truro Wampum Belt, and I think in terms of talking of, you know, people talking about reconciliation and these types of things, and how do we begin to move that to that area. The Truro Wampum Belt represents that these two entities would travel down the river parallel to each other and not get in each other's way, more or less, that they would respect each other's land and that, and so the so there was that kind of that sense that that people would respect that. But what's happened since then, of course, is that it's all changed. And so my question with this is, how do we begin to find a place where we get to talk to one another, where we listen to one another, and what does that lead to? And the next slide. So that's the question that I raised with that one. Each of these panels, I've made about 80 of them now since well, the last 10 years, and each one is going to be accompanied by an audio on my website that gives the information, and also to all the information about where the images come from, where I found them, and whatever else I can find that goes along with it. The idea of intervention came up again when Bear came to stay with me in Ottawa, and I had been working with the Samuel de Champlain Monument since 1992 when I first visited it. It's a long story, but I won't go into it. It'll take a lot more than 20 minutes, but in this case, with the monument, it had a great impact on my life in terms of moving to Ottawa, and also using it as kind of a central access point for me in terms of where do we go from something like this, and how do you intervene into the narrative. So in this particular photograph, it was setting the stage for that intervention, because Bear's t-shirt or shirt has FBI in bold letters on it. And it has two, in my mind, two meanings. The obvious one is below it where it says full-blooded Indian. And then for me as well, it was FBI. And this kind of act of surveillance and and all of these things that I wanted to incorporate into this historical figure, this monument, in the absence of information that is there. The next slide. This is another one that I just recently did about 2 weeks ago. And the photograph on the left-hand side is of a man named Hader Reed. He was a deputy superintendent of Indian Affairs in the last decade of the 19th century. This is a costume ball that took place on Parliament Hill in 1896. Hader Reed had been an Indian agent out west in the area of the Cree and the Blackfoot. He had amassed a collection of tribal things that he had collected and brought back with him. And for the costume ball, he put on the shirt, the honor shirt and leggings. And that's his little stepson there, Jack Lowry, who is wearing a paper version of a shirt that has actual beaded medallions on it. The photograph in the center is the actual shirt in the McCord Museum, which I photographed a number of years ago. And I also photographed the little shirt that that Jack Lowry was wearing as well. And I thought that they had made it for the ball, but it turned out that the Cree people, where it came from, had made the shirt out of paper and then had the beaded rosettes put on it. The photograph on the right-hand side is a cutout Indian head on Highway 7 going up north. And 17 highway, I think it is Highway 17, but nonetheless, it is a tourist attraction kind of thing where you stand at the back and you put your face in it. And this all comes back to the quote that's on the that's at kind of like the doorway of this panel that talks about the residential schools, the industrial schools that Hader Reed was overseeing, and just talking about the irony that's going on here with his outfit in that. Next slide. This is the book that I was speaking about earlier, and it was really fascinating that I used to, every time I'd go visit my elders, I'd look through it and try to understand what was inside of it. And of course, I was too young to really know that. It wasn't a lot of pictures inside. There were a few maps. And but it was this photograph of Joseph Brant that fascinated me. That's now in the collection of the National Gallery of Canada. But a friend of mine gave me this book for my birthday without knowing my history to the book, and so I photographed it, and it led to the road trip that Bear and I made to find the head of the Grand River. The next slide, Patrick. This is about where it is. The story is that I understand is that there are 3 small streams in this area that form the Grand River. Here we are at a pasture, and this is supposedly the Grand River trickling down in a smaller form. And so we made a documentation of it here. I did the GPS reading as information for the caption for the photograph, and I was also able to get Bear into the image as a part of the ongoing Bear portrait series as well. But it was a really significant time for me to have my son with me and to be talking about these things that I heard when I was a kid growing up, and then passing them on to Bear as well. The next slide. Part of my history is becoming a curator. I made this panel called Whitehorn, and Emily General there is my elder, and she had talked one time. She was talking in a conversation with visitors, and at one point she mentioned about the anthropologist coming from Ottawa to visit her father. And she was wondering what happened to the information that the anthropologist had found. And I, as a young boy, made a vow that someday I would find out for her and bring it back. One of the other things besides the book that I would look at when I would go to visit them is that outside of her bedroom door was a photograph of an elderly man standing next to stalks of white corn towering over his head. And he had a handlebar mustache and coveralls and a work shirt on. I memorized that photograph, and I didn't really understand why at the time. But in 1997, Gerald McMaster, who was Indigenous curator at the Museum of Canadian Civilization, invited me to come over and to curate an exhibition from their collection that is based on the Geological Survey of Canada. And so I started going through and finding photographs that I thought would be of interest. And then I said, well, I'd like to see the original negatives now to see if we can get good prints, and nobody knew where they were, which was quite amazing at the time. And I said, well, I can't put an exhibition on with copy negatives. And so there was a bit of panic, and somebody found a link to one of the photographs that I wanted, and it was in the cold storage vault. So I had access to the cold storage vault that was packed with glass plate negatives. It was just the most amazing experience that you can imagine. And I was going through, I had selected 3 anthropologists that I wanted to work with. And then I was looking through a drawer that had these neatly packed about 2.5 by 3 3/4 size glass plate negatives. They were all labeled, they were in their own little envelopes and that. And on the outside of one of them, they were all made at Six Nations by an anthropologist, a physical anthropologist, named Sir Francis Knowles. And so I started looking through them, and then I saw one that said Jacob General on the outside. So I got really excited, put it on the light table, and what you see on the left-hand side is what I saw at that time. And it was almost a younger version of the man that I saw on Emily's wall outside of her bedroom. It was just kind of like the most amazing experience that I could imagine. So I decided to add Francis Knowles to the exhibition as well. And he had actually, Knowles had collected body measurements and pigment samples and hair samples from people at Six Nations, determining the influence of intermarriage with European Canadians. And so this is how this panel began to evolve out of that. The chair next to Emily is something that I remember as me sitting in the chair listening to my elders tell stories, and Emily saying one day that Jeff will tell his own story. And then the white corn braided by my step-grandfather, Bert General, who showed us at that time the traditional weaving method for corn. And I took from that this idea, this precept for my own practice of combining the past, the present, and the future into the work that I do. And then, of course, the photograph of Chief Jacob General. And I think that's the last one. And but anyways, this is kind of a really fast version of what I've been doing, the evolution of my work, of going from just photographing on the streets to having this deep desire to do something that was specifically Indigenous in terms of how we tell our stories. All of these panels are based on the wampum belt. And so each symbol on the wampum belt provides a story in itself. And then at the end is how they all come together, how they synergize into one story that speaks to and addresses the issues that I've been asking and debating for over 40 years now, or more than that, since I was a little kid. And I think that's it.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Now I'm going to turn it over to Bear. And Bear, you can let me know when you want me to put the video on.
Yeah, I guess I'll quickly introduce who Tribe is for anybody who is unfamiliar with us. We're an Indigenous electronic music group. We started back in around 2007. 4 of us, native DJs here in Ottawa, got together to throw a party, basically just with the idea of coming together, I guess, as Indigenous DJs. It was something that we hadn't done before. We were just a bunch of guys who played in clubs around the city, as well as taking the opportunity to have a party that was aimed towards our community. It went off. It went better than we could have expected. From our first party, it was a sellout, and there was a real reaction from the community that showed up that we had to continue doing what we were doing, and that we had created this space for Indigenous people in the city to come and gather, and that was necessary. So we really always operated from this space of, doing things that are community based and are kind of a reaction to where we feel things are at. We became really well known for remixing powwow music with club music, and that kind of became our signature. But what happened very quickly in the early days of the party was we realized that it was really put on us that there was a political voice that came with that creating space for Indigenous people within the club scene of Ottawa was making a statement. And very quickly we had to decide how we were going to react to that. And where it led me right away was to look at, all the things that you just heard my father say. Those were all the things that were informing me as an artist before Tribe. So when we got into that position of needing to decide how our voice was going to be used, I instantly went back to all those things I was raised with, and that's really where our voice in Tribe started. That was based from being informed by those kind of ideas that I'd really been living with my whole life. My dad was telling you from like age 3, being at openings and opening night parties and all these kind of things where I was just around this culture of art and conversations around indigeneity, particularly what it means to be urban and Indigenous. And when Tribe was really taking off and we had started throwing these parties, it really felt that there was this moment where that culture that had been talked about, that I had heard in conversations for years, like what's the face of that? How's it going to look? What's it going to be like? Was really starting to form and solidify as something real. And it was this really exciting thing to be a part of. And again, like always feeling like what we were doing was following the lead of what was happening around us. So I was going through trying to decide what to show today. And actually I realized now I should have lined up a video that showed some of the work that I do as a visual artist that is really, a reaction from growing up with my dad's work. I was actually, in fact, it was him who pushed me into starting to do video art. When I was in my early 20s, he needed somebody to edit video for him. And he was like, well, you did this back in high school. I think you should come and do it for me. And once I started doing it for him, it really became something that I saw myself being able to do as an artist. Because up until that point, I had been super scattered with what I was doing, and I had been a glass blower and DJing clubs and raves and stuff like that. But once my dad really pushed me to take up video, it became something that place where I really found my voice. But when I was getting ready for today and going through video that I wanted to show, I got really nostalgic for playing shows because I was seeing all these live videos that I was coming across. So I lined up two songs from a performance that we did in October 2019. So it was the last big performance that we got to do. I was in Mexico with our good friend Lido Pimienta. So the first clip I wanted to show is of our song called Tano Cumbia. And the original song is a collaboration with an artist, El Dusty from Texas. And he's really a counterpart to what we do with remixing powwow music, but with cumbia music. So we had this combination of powwow cumbia. And then when we got to Mexico and we're playing this show, we had dancers. We usually travel with our own dancers, and they do a combination of breakdancing and powwow dancing. They're super amazing, and they're really respected in the dance community around the world. So they always pull in local dancers. So they had pulled in a few dancers that they knew from Mexico, who were break dancers, but also traditional dancers, and as we found out, big fans of cumbia. So they asked if they could drop some cumbia dance during it. So this is actually one of my favorite moments on stage in recent years. We run it. Patrick, you might want to mute yourself there.
I have to leave my sound on.
Guanajuato, un aplauso a estos bailarines.
Yeah, so that's like such a extra exciting piece for me, just because, like I said, the collaborating with somebody like Al Dusty, who's from down south and doing some things as us, and then being able to bring that down to Mexico and the reaction from the crowd was something else. It was definitely, it was always one of those kind of weird moments when you're bringing something that, you know, isn't like cumbia isn't our music, you know, the powwow part's ours, and that we're, you know, El Dusty brought the cumbia part, but not everybody in the audience knew that. So it was always one of those moments where you don't know how people are going to feel about it, and people, you know, people really recognize the connection we were trying to make, I felt. And, you know, actually it's always that way in Mexico, I feel. You know, we travel all over the world, but you know, when we're places like Mexico and New Zealand and Australia, it's always this really crazy feeling of home, because we're able to make those connections with other Indigenous people, you know, and watching other Indigenous people from all across the world recognize what we're trying to do with our culture and our music right away. You could see a little bit in the background of this. The screens don't show up that well in this video, but on the screens is where you really see the direct connection, I feel, between my work and my father's, is in the way that I use video images, and I take images from media, misrepresentations of Indigenous people, and try to give it new life and kind of a new context, really. You know, it comes from watching the way that my dad works with things like the Curtis photos, or his toy Indians that he's toured the world with, and taking these things that, you know, on one hand, there is a negative side to these things, but in working with them within a conversation and adding your own context to them, you can allow these images to have a new life. And for myself, that's always been something that's been able to take the negativity out of things. You know, you take something that could be or is a one-dimensional misrepresentation of Indigenous people, and, you know, put some colors on it and make it dance. You know, you have something that is now enjoyable, while at the same time we've been able to also confront our audience with these images. You know, one of my favorite things that's happened a number of times is talking to people after the show who will express things like, "Oh, you know, I always loved that that scene from that movie. You know, I thought it was hilarious, but I realized today that, you know, that it's not right, and that it's a racist stereotype." You know, so being able to have something under the surface when it comes to club music, you know, that we exist in Tribe in kind of this interesting space where we're taking something that is generally seen as, I guess, as frivolous, you know, as just a good time, like electronic music, like club culture, and then doing it with intent. And again, that's something that comes directly from watching my father work. He talked about the 3 years that he took off and didn't touch his camera. Well, in that 3 years, he spent all his time in a library researching, you know, and just like basically like finding the intent for the work that he would do, you know, till now, you know. And I really took that process to heart. And now when we're making music, when we're working on projects in Tribe, we actually find it impossible to work without a very specific intent. There was a project not too long ago where we got stuck, you know, and we couldn't figure out why we couldn't crack this song. And we realized it was because we didn't have any intent behind it, and that we needed to find that space to work from, where we knew that we were doing something with this. It wasn't just another song, another remix, that there was a reason behind it. And I really attribute that kind of thinking to growing up with my dad's work. The next clip is also from the same show, and the reason I wanted to show this one specifically is that it's actually something that we haven't released yet, and it's a really part of the new vision of our music, and a very different sound and feeling. And again, when we're talking about while I'm talking about the intent of things, I think we found a new intent with the way that we're treating powwow music, you know, in our remixes, and just like coming at it from a different angle. We've been really party-oriented group for a number of years, and now we're saying like there's other things we want to talk about. I guess there's other ways we want to express this electric powwow. So this is a really good example of that.
Minawa Nangose. Pekan Minawa. Megewe win. Onishishin Kishigat. Don't worry, be happy. And just be grateful for this beautiful day. Do it now.
todo lo que presentía, no me queda nada del amor que yo te di, de todo lo que yo amé, de todo lo que yo te di, ya no me queda nada.
Stop it there. Hard to stop that. Lido is so amazing. And I should mention that the other two musicians on stage with us are Brandon and Kavesh from Lido's band. And then, of course, with me is my partner, Toolman, doing the live remixing. And yeah, that song is it's a really important one to us right now because we keep going back to it kind of as our new center. And it's something that came out of sessions that Tim and I did at his place in LA and working with another artist from out there. And we just found this new place with the powwow music and being able to kind of I kind of been thinking about it as like as a flattening out of it. And before we were really following the powwow music, and now we're starting to craft things to our music from the get-go. So the actual powwow vocals in that song were taken from a session that we did with Chippewa Travelers in Toronto. So we were able to produce that from the ground up and direct the powwow group and really work with them collaboratively to start to make this music. Whereas before it was a very from the outside, us finding powwow music that worked for us and chopping it up, and now that we're bringing the drums more into our process. Has just it's I can only explain it as finding a new place with something that we've worked with for a very long time. Yeah, I think that's about what I got to say. I think that's about time.
So thanks so much, Bear and Jeff. It was amazing to hear you speak, and I'm kind of loath to jump in and start talking, but I just want to ask you a couple of questions and hear both of you have a little bit of discussion, and then we'll invite the students and other folks back. So Jeff, maybe I'll start with you. You mentioned how you're referring to yourself more specifically as a storyteller these days, and certainly you mentioned activism as well. And I wondered if you could maybe, talk about how you make the kinds of decisions you need to make regarding the kind of story you want to tell. And I know that you've done curating, you did a really important exhibition regarding residential schools, and certainly you have a long practice as an artist, as a photographer. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about, is that the same process, or are you making different kinds of choices when you decide to curate something as opposed to making a photograph?
What I found that was interesting when I went into curating, it was just out of necessity. The Library and Archives wanted to put on a survey exhibition of their collection. And I was invited to be a guest co-curator at that time with Edward Tompkins, who was an archivist at then. And I just essentially, it's the same thing I did as a researcher, is that I used what I learned or taught myself from looking at the world through a camera to doing the same thing and looking in the archives for things that I found would open the door to something new. So let's say if you see a photograph in a book and it's an academic publication, my first thought is, I wonder how many other images were in that collection, and if there's something there that I would choose that would be different from the person that wrote the book. So that was my motivation, and to become a researcher. And as well as the curator, it just fell into place out of necessity. Nobody else was working with historical photographs. And when it came to the residential school, I was the choice for that one, because at that time, in 2000, there still was nobody that was working with historical photographs or had a knowledge of Library and Archives collections. So, I don't think I made any decisions anywhere. I found that everything happened as it should happen. It fell into place, doors opened for me that I never could have imagined. The first time I started doing research at the Manitoba Museum, I requested a book that was called the Hidatsa Eagle Catching Technique. And it was an anthropological publication. And they found out where it was, and the anthropologist who had the book had to come down and see who was requesting it. And that's how I met Catherine Pettipas, and that's how everything started in 2005, back to Winnipeg and the Manitoba Museum with an exhibition on residential schools. So, you know, the questions that I left Winnipeg with, I pursued in Ottawa, and each time I just followed where I was being told to go, and the doors opened up. And it seemed like I didn't have to make any decisions. The only thing I had to do, and this is what I told Bear when he was growing up, it's like a like a Ferris wheel or whatever. It keeps on going around and around, and when you're ready, it'll stop and you'll get on it. And so that's really something that I learned from my elders, and I think something that is just how we are as Indigenous people in the way that we see and work in the world. So, and it's the same thing with everything else that I've done, whether I started writing because I wasn't reading anything that was like with Edward Curtis, things that I found that nobody else was talking about. So I started writing. All of these things just kind of, you know, fell into place. And I wish there was you know, making decisions. I don't know. I just listen to the wind and it just tells me where to go next.
I'll take that advice. Thanks so much, Jeff. I have other questions, but when you talk about, I'm thinking I want to turn to Bear. You know, when you talk about the advice that you gave Jeff, Bear, you're really articulate about the way that your the culture, you know, Indigenous culture and the kind of politics and culture around indigeneity and your music work together. And that's not always automatic, I think, for artists to kind of say something and also make work that really resonates. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, you know, how that came to be. Was that something you had to kind of work at? I know you've said that you were sort of immersed in Indigenous culture and Indigenous challenges and realities as you were growing up. So, you know, was it sort of automatic that was going to be part of what you would do to express yourself, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, no, it wasn't automatic at all. In fact, I was running away from it. You know, it's not just my father who's an artist in my family. It's my mother and my grandmother and my great aunts. It's a huge portion of my family are artists. And being involved with arts and being involved with politics from a really young age, you know, I was never talked down to. Things were always explained to me. And so having all of those things kind of put on you for your whole life, you hit, like I hit a point in like my late teens, early 20s where I just wanted to get away from it all. And that's actually how I became a DJ. That's how, you know, I started going to raves because I just wanted to dance and kind of, you know, break out of this kind of artistic activist environment where everything had to mean something all the time, you know, and that's how led me to DJing. And eventually, you know, I was a glass blower for a long time. I was a cook for a long time. I did everything to stay away from arts and becoming, you know, kind of becoming part of the family business, I guess, you know. And the harder I tried to get away from it, the more it followed me, you know. And once you know, Tribe took off and we found ourselves in that position where we needed to take up a voice, my father's voice came out of my mouth, my mother's voice came out of my mouth, and I was saying things like to my own group members, like, this isn't a question of if we want to or not. It's like it's a responsibility to take up this voice, you know. And you know, I remember my dad explaining to me really early on when I was doing video work that, you know, as Indigenous artists, we don't have the luxury to just make work. That, you know, we have a responsibility to shed light on things that don't get enough attention. You know, so as soon as we started getting in newspapers or on TV, it was like, no, we have to make statements here. We can't just go along and say we're club DJs and we make club music.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it makes me think, you know, maybe I'll ask both of you, or I'll turn to you, Jeff. You know, I'm thinking about that, the sort of family connection, the family business in the arts, as Bear suggests. And I'm thinking, you know, was that conscious for you, that you wanted Bear to kind of understand the importance of art, how art works, and maybe further to that, you know, was it a conscious kind of mentoring thing, or was it just about being a parent and being a person? You know, I wonder if you could talk a bit about that, because I think that, you know, without being all preachy, I think that we do need mentors, and artists do need mentors, and we need, you know, maybe it's even possible that we need artists to mentor culture. So maybe you can riff on that a little bit, both of you, if you can.
There, unmute. Yeah, that's quite a question. And it's fairly easy to answer, I think, if I can remember it all. It's, I think with Bear, there was this natural bond as his father that just overwhelmed me, that it didn't have anything to do with raising them to be a DJ or a famous artist or anything like that. It was just that he was my son, and he was the best looking baby in the world. And and I was fortunate with my car accident in one way, that I was able to stay home and take care of him while his mother, Monique, was going out and touring that. So for the first number of years, I was his sole caregiver. So it was really important. I think that I didn't go into the arts to be political. I went into the arts to save my life. And being 24 years old and having everything taken away from you leaves you in a kind of a vacuum where, what do you do? And everybody's telling you that don't think about it because you can never work again. So I had that right from the start in terms of wanting to prove everybody wrong. And then slowly I began to incorporate what I had learned from my elders when I was growing up, and I began to understand what they were telling me when I was a kid. So, you know, I wanted to be able to pass that on to Bear as well, but not in a way that pushed him. So I kept on waiting and waiting and waiting, and I knew what he was doing, and he was looking for, you know, his own self as, you know, as a maker of things. And with his mother as well. I mean, he grew up as a backstage baby, so he was, you know, conversant long before his years in the arts. So, but the idea of how do you grow up as a good human being is the fundamental precept for being an artist. I feel it is, because everything that I learned culturally from my elders just fit in with my work as an artist as well. So I've used all of those things. How do you treat people? How do you treat the things you do? I treat photographs that I find in archives as living things. When I curated an exhibition for the Museum of Civilization, I was looking at photographs that had never been exhibited before, from 1914 to 1949. And at one point I realized that I just can't have them come out into the public on their own. They weren't dressed in tribal clothing or anything like that. It was just, these were farmers, these were storekeepers and that. And so what I did is I invited 6 contemporary Indigenous artists to participate in the exhibition, so that there was one generation reaching out to a new generation. Whether anybody saw that or understood it, it didn't matter, because that was how it's supposed to be. So, you know, I think that if you proceed with a career and you do what you know has to be done and you respect those things, everything else falls into place. And of course, with Bear, I knew that eventually would as well, because he was born at home. And people don't, I don't know if he tells people this, but we had a home birth. and I was there for it. And after he emerged into the world, I heard these growls outside the window, and so that's when we named him. I called him Nehonyabwe, which means young bear in Cayuga language, and so that's stuck with him ever since then, and has given him what I believe is the strength and the courage to do the things that he's done, and not end up in prison. You know, I mean, that's what we all want for our children, right? But it's kept him protected, and that's just living life the way you should be living it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeff. Bear, I don't know if you want to jump in. One thing that occurs to me too is the way that your music may have the potential to influence others. I guess I'm thinking about young people too, but I don't know if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I am so fortunate and grateful to have grown up with a father like mine, and not only, you know, as a great father, but as a mentor. You know, like there's something so natural but so missed, I think, right now, in the way that knowledge gets passed down through the generations like that. You know, and it was such a natural thing for us, and I think an easy thing, you know. And I think the kind of mentoring that I got from my father, you know, in terms of being an artist, are the kind of things that you can only learn from somebody who spent their life creating art. You know, it's like the things that you're never going to learn unless you have that kind of access to somebody. You know, just simple things like being told, you know, how to talk about my work and the importance of talking about my work. That's such a difficult thing. I've talked about with so many of my peers, you know, how to, like, having the confidence to be able to say, you know, to tell people that these thoughts that I had that led to me making this work is important. But I had somebody who was telling me, no, these are the things that people want to hear about your work. You know, it is important. You do need to be able to talk about these things, and showing me how to talk about those things just by being with him. So, you know, there's a whole other education that went on that I think, you know, like I said, that you miss unless you have that kind of close access to somebody, that I think is so natural in a parent-child situation. And so, like, so many things in my life have worked out like that after, and I think having that basis with my dad has allowed me to be open to, like you said, listening to the signs and being able to recognize when it's time to get on the ride.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. Yeah, it strikes me that, you know, the idea that art and culture, you know, we need to understand that it's about making a connection, and certainly in a kind of family context, if you can learn that, it sounds kind of really, really important. Before I ask the others to join us, I wanted to say I'm sorry about the music. I hear that the sound wasn't as good as it was supposed to be, and so we had a problem. So I apologize for that, Bear. So you'll all have to do a search and hear a better version of the sound. So I'm going to invite Michelle and Sarah and Spencer and Michael, if you want to come back on. And I know that I think we were going to start with Michelle, or I'm sorry, I think it was going to be Sarah was going to ask a question.
Sure. First, I just wanted to say thank you so much to both of you for giving that talk. I actually had goosebumps several times during that. It was very just beautiful, and I enjoyed it very much. This question is specifically for Jeff. So I'm speaking as a settler in Canada, hoping to go on to a career of curating. I'm in 4th year, about to graduate, really looking forward to that. But I find myself thinking more and more about the places and the land itself upon which curating and art happens, and especially in relation to of course, more recent surges in social issues, practices of decolonization, inclusivity, and things like that. And you definitely talked to this question somewhat in relation to your photography practice, but I was wondering if you could talk to your understanding and practice relating to the concept of curating and land and kind of land-based pedagogy in that way.
Geez, I'm not. I think that, it's a question I've never been asked before.
Sorry, I wasn't trying to stump you, but.
No, I know it's a good question, and one that I want to take seriously. I think that, you know, when I had the first time that the idea of that type of agency came into play, I was having a show in Lethbridge, and I was artist in residence, so I was teaching a workshop to a group of youth there, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. And what I did, this is perfect for this then, is that what I set out for them to do was I said, I want you to each go to a place here that is specific to you, whether it's where you like to go to eat something or hang out or smoke weed or whatever you want to do. I said, I want you to photograph that place and I want you to write about it. And I remember the difficulty I had in trying to get them to believe that I actually wanted to read what they had to say. And so one by one, they started coming back, and one young woman had photographed a hotel, and the owner came out and asked her what she was doing. And she said that it was an assignment for a workshop she was taking. So the man took her into the building and showed her and told her about the history of the building. And she wrote like 2 pages of it. All of the participants had their opening the same night as mine. So they put it onto the website, the Southern Alberta Art Gallery, put it on at the same time as my opening. And even some of the elders came out from the nearby reserve because for several of the students to participate. They probably would have never gone to an art gallery otherwise. Maybe the youth wouldn't have gone to an art gallery otherwise. But there was something about them going out with a common theme of land, of place, of self, and coming back with the results of that. So I often think that was probably one of my proudest moments in teaching a workshop, because I believe that it probably still resonates with some of them as well. And then the other one was the residential school exhibition, which was determined from the start that each venue would have Indigenous people there, whether it was in the city or on a reserve. And one of the best examples is, so right from the beginning, the mandate was to curate an exhibition for Indigenous people, which is something I'd never heard of before. So, so it was a partnership between what was then the Aboriginal Healing Foundation and Library and Archives Canada. And so we developed the exhibition. I developed it. It opened on National Aboriginal Day in 2002 at Library and Archives Canada. A second version was made that opened in the fall and has been traveling across Canada since 2002. And it's just, this is what happens when you make an exhibition that has meaning for the people in the community. When we had our opening at Manitoba, it was probably the best opening of the whole time, because the dignitaries came downstairs, got off the elevator, and there was a drum group waiting there for us. They took us into the auditorium, and the auditorium was packed with Indigenous people. It was just the most amazing sight that I've ever seen as an artist. And it was hard to talk after that, because I had to make a speech. But I was speaking to brown-skinned people in the audience. And so in terms of place in the residential schools, the meeting that they had, how do we go about challenging something like that? How do we reconcile ourselves first to that history before we talk about reconciling with anybody else? how do we begin to understand that history? And I think here's something that maybe will be helpful in terms of your question, is that we often had, like there was one venue at Red Lake, the Red Lake Reservation in I think it was Central Ontario, and they put on their own exhibition of residential schools. They hired two young Indigenous women to come in, and they began to gather the material. They put it all together. The Manitoba Museum did the same thing. They went through their own collections, looked for things that were relevant to that history, and put on an exhibition as well. Not only that, but they took it to another level where they were negotiating with the Winnipeg police to get a tree and grow lights that they had confiscated from people that were growing grass, marijuana. And they donated it to the exhibition so that they could put this tree in the gallery, and people were able to make comments on, like, sticking up on note paper and put it on the tree. And then they had also a designated area for survivors to speak to people who work in that area, in that crisis area. So these are the things that go into accommodating an Indigenous-based exhibition. And of course, Indigenous people will always respect somebody who takes the time to reach out and to make an effort, a serious effort, to work with the Indigenous community. And I think that we're moving more and more towards that. And like working with Patrick as co-curators on this exhibition is one of the best experiences I've had in terms of curating and bringing people together from different backgrounds and finding that we all have a common basis that we're working from. It's quite amazing. It becomes organic at that point. And that's what you want. You want an exhibition that takes on its own energy, its own life. It becomes its own entity, and it grows and it breathes and it does all of those things.
Thank you very much. That's just a beautiful answer.
So, Michelle?
Thanks. Yeah, I definitely want to echo Sarah, and thank you for both of you for being here today. And Jeff, I get so excited every time I hear you talk about just all the possibilities in the world. But my question is for Bear. I'm wondering if you could speak about the process of remixing and collaboration in your work, and how you take up and amplify the voices of others. But I'm also thinking specifically about Kent Monkman's video, Sisters and Brothers. That video has stuck with me. It's such a powerful piece. If people haven't seen it, it's still up on the National Film Board website. But I can't imagine that work without the Tribe Called Red song. And I wonder if it's ever difficult to give up authorship in that way.
Well, directly in the way like of the having the song in Kent's video, no, that's super easy. You know, with working with artists like that and people who, I mean, like we got an email from Kent saying, you know, can we use this song? And you know, I told my people, yes, of course, it's Kent, let's do it. But there are times, I guess, when people don't consult us, and those times can be difficult. But I think by the nature that we come from DJ culture and remix culture, and it's all about, you know, finding those things that you want to sample, getting your music out there and getting other DJs playing your music. So there's always that spirit of sharing going on. So no, it's generally not difficult. You know, one thing that comes to mind is we have a song called RED with Narcy and Yassine Bey, and when before we put out the actual song, we put out an instrumental version called Stadium Pow Wow, and that instrumental version had been around for a little while, but just before we put out the RED version, there was another rapper, native rapper from the States, who rapped on top of it and put it out as like it was a standing rock video, and it was all about the pipeline. And so it's all stuff that we support and that we're happy to be a part of. But this rapper never asked us. He never approached us. It's just something that he put out into the world. we never stopped it. We never like hit him with a cease and desist or did anything like that. Because like I said, we support everything that he did. But it was just difficult to us to have, you know, if he had approached us, it would have been like, yes, we can do something, but this is about to come out. And, you know, there's times like that, it can be difficult. But we you know, so much of what we want to do is to get this stuff out there. And there's been specific songs like recently the song we put out, Land Back, and before that, The Road, where we put those songs out specifically to support the movements that were happening at the moment. And with the message that said, if you're making a video about things that are going on, if you're doing something that is drawing attention to these that you need a song for, these are the songs, and we're happy for you to use them. And, you know, we just contact us and we're not going to charge anything, kind of thing. And that started because when Idle No More was happening, when we put out The Road, people were like, where's our song? You know, like we literally got asked that. People were playing our music at protests and stuff, but they were like, but where's our song for now? So that's why we put that out there. And when it comes to collaborating, I mean, everything that Tribe does is a collaboration, you know, right from being a collective of people just to working with drums and sampling drums and then working with other artists and producers. And at the heart of that is even a collaboration between Toolman and myself. And one of the things that is so amazing and feels so good at the moment with our group is both Toolman and myself have collaborated with many different people over the years, even within the group. But now we're two artists who are both from Six Nations. You know, I wasn't raised there. I was raised mostly in Toronto, but he was raised in the community. But we have a common understanding of values and expectations and ways of working and ways of treating people that we don't have to discuss now. And that's made our collaboration so much stronger because we're both pulling in the same direction and we know we have that basis that's the same. And that's just made it easier to go out in the world and collaborate with more and more people.
Thanks so much.
That was great.
So Spencer?
Yeah, thanks so much for your amazing stories and words today. My question, I know we're almost wrapping up here and it's a bit of a big one, so take it and answer however you feel. But what do you want to see in the next generation of Indigenous and non-Indigenous relationships in Canada? And how do you envision art as playing a significant role in this future?
I think for me, I've always taken public speaking, especially at universities, to be very important in terms of providing that message, as well as with my exhibitions and curatorial projects, as well as providing what I had learned when I was growing up. And I believe that people can tell when it comes from a certain place as opposed to somewhere else. I grew up hearing over and over again that so-and-so passed away and didn't pass on his or her knowledge to the next generation because there was nobody there that wanted it. And I heard that over and over and over again. And so it was something that became kind of a mantra in my own practice in terms of sharing what it is that I do. Like Barrett's talking, it's the same thing for me in terms of if I collaborate or if I give something away for, you know, for an auction or something, it just is the way to do things. And it's important to be able to pass that on. A different way of looking at the arts is not being precious, but something that is to be shared. And it is something, I think that as Indigenous people, we have a natural inclination to be artists, that when you listen to our languages, they're the most beautiful thing you hear in the world. It's like poetry, and the dances and everything else. You know, there's something that is inherent in our people, and we have to nurture that for the next generation as well. We have to be able to say and to show that that you can do things in the arts that you probably couldn't do anyplace else. We have to make sure that what we do as artists. We go through stages, you know. It's like the first stage of people like, you know, Tom Hill, Gerald McMaster, Leanne Martin. You can go down the list of people who are that first wave of important artists that were recognized. And then I kind of like myself, Shelley Nero, and some others come into the next wave, bring photography into focus. And we've been able to have representation, juries now in museums and galleries. And the next stage, what I feel is the most important and what I'm preparing my next exhibition for is how do we connect with youth? And how do we continue to make sure that it's passed on to the next generation? I've done it as a practice with my son. And when I see the audiences that he can pull in and people begin to move to this beat and take in the intent, it's quite amazing. And in my mind, I feel like I did my job. So where does that go? That's how we have to work, and that's how we have to see the world, because it's the young people that whose minds that we can nurture, and we have to take responsibility for that, just plain and simple.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Bear?
Yeah, I mean, with Tribe, like part of our success is not only the way that our own community, you know, picked up and ran with what we were putting out there, but it was also being listened to by people outside of our community and non-Indigenous people. And that's definitely one of those things that, you know, you think a lot about, what does this mean when it starts to move outside of our community? You know, when we're out there playing, you know, just big summer festivals and things where, you know, maybe there's not that many Indigenous people there. And one of the things that I came to, and this was really during, you know, when we were talking about reconciliation all the time, and really with Indigenous people, what did that mean to us? One of the things that in Tribe we came to was that conversation was so far into the future from where we were today, and that there were so many steps that needed to be made to get to that point. So we were being asked to participate in a lot of things around then, and this how we had to justify not being a part of a lot of things, was that we felt that we hadn't laid the basis to have that conversation yet. And where I feel that Tribe comes into that was that we're playing these huge festivals, and all these people are in the audience having an experience together. And that experience is to Indigenous culture. So when we start to have communal experiences like that across communities, we start to create the basis to have those bigger conversations. Because so many things come down to just not understanding each other's experience. You know, and it's a simple thing. It's not like, you know, you're learning everything about Indigenous culture by coming to one of our shows. But what you're getting is a slice of how Indigenous people portray themselves, and being able to experience that in you know, together. That starts to lay out the basis where generations from now we'll have a better understanding of each other. We will have common experiences, and those conversations can actually happen the way they need to, you know, nation to nation, and with respect and understanding and love.
Thank you so much.
Well, we've kept us all here a while, and it has been remarkable. So I just want to say that you both shared so much and so beautifully, and with encouragement and generosity and history. And so I don't want to say anything more other than thank you. And thank you on behalf of all of us. There's many friends of SASAH and everybody out there. And I thank you all for joining us. And we couldn't appreciate Bear and Jeff more than we do. So thank you.